Welcome to the Avon Talks podcast. I'm your host, longtime resident Jim Pavish. Today we'll take a trip back in time to a place filled with laughter, campfires, and the spirit of friendship. For decades, Camp Gertrude Bryant in Avon was summer home to ever-changing generations of Girl Scouts. It was a place to explore nature, learn new skills, and form bonds that would last a lifetime. PFC Gertrude Louise Bryant was a young woman whose life and service left a lasting mark on the community. In the middle of the 20th century, Camp Gertrude Bryant welcomed girls from across the region, offering a place to learn, lead, and grow. These camp experiences were more than just summer fun. They reflected a time in Avon's history when community, outdoor life, and self-reliance shaped young people in ways that were unique to an era and in other ways still matter today. Avon Talks welcomes lifetime resident and camper Jeannie Parker. Welcome to the Avon Talks podcast, Miss Jeannie Parker. It's a pleasure, and Let's start with a personal question. How old were you when you first attended Camp Gertrude Bryant?
Well, I don't know if I went with my mother the day it opened, but I was there soon after. I would have been, it opened in 47, and I was born in 41. So I was 6, 7 years old probably by the time I actually went there. And although I don't know where I would have stayed if I didn't go with my mother, because we were at the farm and the men were all out working and I would have been by myself. So I think I probably tagged along with her. I never asked. It was just a part of what we did way back then. Mm-hmm. You hung around with your parents unless they were going off to work. But she was a counselor and she was done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that was it. I guess maybe it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So anyway, it was a great place, and I cannot thank the people who made this possible for this community. The Girl Scouts in this area were lone troops, and they didn't belong to a council. In the cities, they all belong to councils, and they get everything organized for them, and they have to do this, that, and the other thing. But the lone troops kind of were independent and ran on their own.
Avon was the ends of the earth then.
Kind of.
They were very rural.
Well, when I was born, there were 3,000 people in town. So there was a big difference back then.
Certainly, yeah.
So anyway, I started in Brownies over here. I was in 3rd grade when they closed the last 2 one-room schools in town.
Where was that one-room schoolhouse?
Pine Grove.
Okay.
And then the other was the one on Lovely Street, on the corner of Country Club and Lovely Street. And so that was the Lovely Street one-room schoolhouse. And they were doing this all over the country, closing the one-room schools to go to a more central school where you had one person overseeing all the teachers instead of one teacher in this school, one teacher in that school, and not being all in the same building. So we came over to Towpath. I started at camp. My mother began as a nature counselor. And really, her background was physical education, and she was eventually their director of the swim classes and everything for pretty much all the rest of the time. The last couple of years, they had some younger gals come in, but my mother was doing that, and she was that was her forte. So that was fun, and I started to go by myself on my bicycle when I was probably 8. And I'd take my father's leather gym bag and put my lunch in it and my towel and my bathing suit, and I'd pedal up the street from the farm. And then when you got up, do you remember where the community club was across from the high school, the white building that they tore down?
That's before my time, but I would like to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I would turn on the right across from the Burnham's farm, and that's still there. The barns aren't there, but the big white house is there, and it's almost on the corner of the next Hollister. So
okay, yeah, of course.
Almost on the corner of Hollister.
Near the high school.
Yeah. And the camp was way up that cornfield on a dirt road all the way at the top of the hill where the football team at Avon High School used to have all their practices out there. And the camp was on the top of that knoll, but then it went all the way through almost to Burnham Road.
So it was up the hill almost on Hollister.
No, the other
Okay.
direction.
Where the high school.
Yes,
The high school.
Yeah, and all that land had been the Burnham land, and there was some Hart land. The Harts had some of that land as well, and they ended up selling it for the school to be built.
Those were all both farms, Burnham and Hart at that time?
Hart wasn't too much of a farm at that point. He was raising chickens and doing things like that, but he wasn't. I don't think he was haying and doing all of that. Maybe he let somebody else come and hay and could, use that for their animals. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't need much for the chickens.
Right. Why was the camp named to honor Gertrude Bryant?
That goes back, and it was why the camp was named. Well, Gertrude was a scout, perhaps as a brownie, when the first troop was formed in Avon. And that was back in 1922. Her mother, Alice, was very active in the Avon Women's Club, and she was president for a number of years, and really a driving force behind establishing the camp. Her father took time off from work to make the camp a reality, and Gertrude was dedicated to scouting and earned the rank of Golden Eaglet and became a leader. She embodied all the things we think of as a true Girl Scout. She was loyal, curious, knowledgeable, upright, all the things that we really think are fantastic that girls usually exhibit. And she served her country with honor in the Women's Army Corps, and that later was changed to the Women's Army Corps, not Women's Army Air Corps. That was what it was initially. And while serving, she became ill and died 3 weeks later. And it was as she was turning 27 years old. And I'd like to read one thing, if I may. It's just one short paragraph.
Please.
At the dedication ceremony, Mrs. Bourne, who had worked with the Scouts, expressed it this way: "When I think of the way of life of a Girl Scout, to be honest, cheerful, courteous, friendly, loyal, and useful, I am ever mindful of one who in every way exemplified the true spirit of Girl Scouting in her everyday life, always smiling, ready to lend a helping hand, giving freely of her time and talents, making all those whose lives she touched happier for having known her, carrying her scouting into that larger community outside of which she lived, and finally laying down her life in the service of her country. She was truly a Girl Scout." That was spoken at the dedication of the camp. At the end of the first season of the camp, they had decided that really she was the perfect type of girl that they wanted to name the camp after. So,
do you know if Gertrude, she was in the Avon Girl Scouts until, whatever, say 17 or 18 years old?
Yes, and then she became a leader and was very active that way and promoted Girl Scouting. So I don't know if I said that she was in the motor pool when she was in the wax. And she had been driving right up to the time that she got sick and had to go to the hospital and passed away. It was a real shock to everyone.
How about what was transportation to the camp like in those days?
The first transportation for the Avon girls was John O'Neill, and he had O'Neill's.
The car dealer.
Yes, right, and he did that and picked up the girls. I don't know where, because I just rode my bicycle. A lot of children, girls, their mothers would drop them off. Unionville and Simsbury both wanted to come to the camp, and it turned out that they had people that came and helped from their Lions Club and from just the general community to help the girls have this camp. It was an astounding thing that they were able to build that camp in 1 year. They kept improving it by doing other things, but the women's club here in town was, at that point, I think Alice Bryant was the head of it, was the president.
The mother of Gertrude.
Yes, and her husband, I think he was working at Ensign Bickford. I'm not sure, but I think that's what he was doing. And they really put a ton of time into this, but the women did, because they knew how excited the girls were to think they were going to have a place to call their own. It was a Girl Scout camp where they could do the outdoor things that they couldn't do if they were meeting in somebody's house or whatever. And it was exciting for them, and they were so annoyed because the boys had Camp Alsop just about where the bridge goes over before you get to the furniture store at the bottom of the Avon Mountain.
I had heard of that. Yeah, that's where Camp Alsop was.
Yes, right. And it was by the river, and the boys had a camp there. And
Is it a scouting camp or just
Boy Scout?
Okay.
Yeah. And then there was another camp in town on Country Club Road, and when you get up to the first big curve where you go around near, I'm thinking what the name of the street is. Anyway, it's on the left-hand side going west on Country Club Road. It used to be called Country Club Extension because it extended beyond the Country Club Road that went by the country club.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a camp in there on the left. There was a pond, and it's still in front of the fellow's house that's there. And they had a wonderful camp there, and I don't recall the name of it. I don't know if they ever let the Boy Scouts from Avon use that camp, but it was a West Hartford Boy Scout troop that had that, and maybe more than just one troop in West Hartford. I don't know. I don't know how many they had, but the girls were really jealous because they wanted a place of their own, and you couldn't blame them. I mean, they wanted to learn all these things, and there were girls that helped out with clearing the land that the Burnhams loaned to them. And after the first year, they all became a little more businesslike. And finally, the women's club, I guess, I was going to look that up. The women's club, I just said that it was more businesslike, to have an arrangement. And really, the Burnhams should have had something, because the whole town was using their property. The community club land was donated and given by them to the community club to build that wonderful place where everything from minstrel shows to Christmas parties to all kinds of things that we had there that were really wonderful. And they used to have, if somebody was getting married, they'd have the guys go there for their stag party, and the girls would have a shower there, and people would have their reception there after their wedding. I mean, it was used for a lot of things. And the people in Avon Center even came over to use that pool because they didn't really have a pool over here. They had one place over near Ensign Bickford where there was a place to go in, and I forget the name of that, but it was really, the kids from all over town came there for their Red Cross lessons and for their free swims and all that kind of thing. And it finally petered out once kids and parents started to go to country clubs and so forth, because it was, they had fancier places.
More money behind it, or
and the pool was only 10 by 30 yards.
Okay.
But it was just absolutely filled with all these kids, and they had a grand time there. I mean, they had a diving board. They had, it was just, and they actually had bathrooms there, which, a lot of places you'd be in somebody's brook somewhere and you didn't have all those facilities. I think I may have mentioned another time to you or someone else that she was a great student. She was also a wonderful musician and had hoped to become a professional in that field. So it was a great loss. She had a lot of life ahead of her, and it was too bad she didn't get there with it.
That's very sad. That's
Yep.
very sad. But it's, I suppose, timely that the town honored her with the
Yes,
camp, too.
yes.
I mean, how many years after are we remembering Mrs. Bryant? What improvements to the camp were made over time?
Oh, I came up with a few things that I was going to mention about something like that. Electricity was not installed at the camp for 2 years, and so it was the beginning of the third season that they actually had power. Initially, water pumps were installed, and later on a water system, thanks to the Lions Club. Eventually, wooden platforms were built for each unit, and then they put the large tents on top of those so the girls weren't sleeping on the ground all the time. And they could keep the place tidy and keep their belongings nice if they were going to be staying overnight or even just their daily activities there. And later on, I forget how many years it was, but they built a kitchen, and it was outfitted with a gas stove and a refrigerator and a sink. And in the early days, ice was delivered to the camp to keep their milk cold and their bagged lunches cold. And the milk that they served, we always thought that was special because they were half pints of milk, regular or chocolate. And that was a big deal for us because we didn't have chocolate milk at home very often. And so I thought that was pretty cool. So that was about all. But they kept upgrading things, and I think one of the hardest things that they did, or most difficult, was to put in the early water that they used for the pumps that were spread around. And it was crazy because the men had so much trouble getting that point down, and it got bent, and they had to pull it up and start all over again to get the point down into the ground to where the water was.
Wow.
And
this was a community effort.
These were just guys that were helping out. Everybody was doing their thing, whatever they had a talent for. And when they said they needed water right away, people showed up with dowsers. They were dowsers. That's what they were called. And they were using. I thought it was a divining stick. It's a dividing stick. I looked it up on the computer.
Yeah, they cross
yes,
over
it's
water.
like a forked stick, and it pulls it down out of their hands, kind of. It draws. You'd think it was a magnet or something. But anyway, it's really cool to think about it. And they had a couple of fellows who came, and they each did it separate from one another, and they hit the same spot.
See, that's amazing.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It really is, yeah. Yeah, so I thought that was cool.
Did any other groups use the camp? And if so, what for?
Oh, well, there were various times the camp was used for other kinds of gatherings. And the Boy Scouts in town sometimes would have special badges and awards that they were receiving. And there was always lots of parking up there. If they did that at the community club, there wasn't much parking. They'd be along the road. There wasn't too much room to pull off there. So it would be safer to have it up there. And it was just a nice area. It was open, and they could have a fire up there. They could have plenty of room for people to sit on benches around wherever they were having their ceremony. So that worked out really pretty well. And the Lions, I think, had some gatherings up there, probably a picnic or whatever. And the Lions had done a lot to get the camp up and going. And also, for years after that, they were always putting money into things and trying to help the women there who were from the Avon Women's Club, who were kind of in the background. Not in the background. They were the ones that kept things going with the directors and so forth, with registration and when advertising and when things were going to be set up for the kids to come each season.
The community club, that was the pool club, correct?
Yes.
And there was a permanent structure there as well, or?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
okay.
That was only torn down a couple of years ago. It was the old white building across the street from the entrance to the Avon High School. and it was really a social center. That's a whole talk in itself, because of the way it was through a boys group in town that got started. And one of the men worked with the boys, and they built that building. And it's really a fantastic story all by itself. Might make a good podcast for you sometime.
Yeah, I will have to dig deeper into that.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Who are some of the other directors of the camp?
There were quite a few of them. I think maybe 8 altogether. The first director was Arlene Slater, and she was hired to come in 1947, but the entire staff volunteered their time. They were not paid at all the first year. And they had 1 to 8 weeks of service, and they spent all that time with those girls and never got paid. But Arlene Slater has had a very strong background in scouting and professional recreation work, and had worked in California and other places. And she was the one that had all the background in scouting and was able to direct all this and did a fine job. But then she had the audacity to get married and moved away. So
a lot changed for like women then when they got married.
Exactly.
Very different from now.
And they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other directors after that. And one lady came for only 1 year in 1948. Her name was Margaret Beaubleu, and there were 192 girls that attended that year. The camperships were made available by the Avon Women's Club over the years for the girls who might not be able to come otherwise. And about the first 8 years of the camp, the radio show was taped by WTIC, and it delighted the community and the campers. They came there. The first couple of years, there was no electricity at the camp, so they couldn't have the interview done there, and the kids couldn't do their singing and tell stories and everything there. So they went to the Burnham's barn and did it 1 year, and 1 year they did it at, I believe, at the community club. And it would depend on the weather and so forth. But anyway, they had power at the Burnhams, so that was the big deal. And then Katie Power Ruiz was the next one, and she was there for 2 years and was a fantastic director. And she worked with people from around the area, and her assistant was Bev Selberg Benson. I think she lived up in Burlington. And Evelyn Patchy Carville Donaldson and Shirley Carter Crumpagel. And these names are familiar around here because these women all worked around this area afterward. Patchy was a lifeguard at the pool during the day, and Shirley Crumpagel was working in the offices up in Collinsville. I forget what her position was. And my mother was Betty Thompson, and she was water director. So they had some people that came back year after year, and, you know, they stepped in and knew their jobs and did a fine job of it. So I didn't mention, Katie Power Ruiz was there, that the main unit hall was a former army barracks, and Katie remembers it being there when she was a director. It was a project of the Lions to bring that in, and I can't imagine how difficult it was to move that building up the hill on that old dirt road. It would not be easy, I'm sure of that. So
when you say barracks, it was like surplus from the war? Or
yes,
that type of structure?
I think maybe they were officers' quarters. Mm-hmm. There were 2 of them, and I don't know if they pieced them together, but it was one big, long building. And it was terrific for all camp activities if somebody wanted to put on a skit or something, or if it was buggy outside that night and they didn't want to do it around a campfire, they might go inside to do that. And there was an old piano in there, and the kids would go in and play different tunes that kids like to play at parties and stuff on the piano. And So anyway, that worked out very nicely to have that there on a rainy day. They could do all kinds of things inside. They would set it up for not only for programs, but for crafts and for a lecture if somebody comes to speak to them, which they did from time to time. The women from who were directors, as well as scout leaders in the area and people from the women's club, would all make suggestions about good programs for the girls to learn about.
I understand a reunion was held in 2014. Where was that, and who participated?
Well, there was a committee, and we just sort of got together. I would say it was a brainchild. Everybody talked about a reunion, but nobody had a plan for it. And Sue Glynn McMaster was really the brains behind it. There were 5 of us all together, but she has an unbelievable creative mind, and she came up with all kinds of exciting ideas, and she is very artistic. She could make signs and do all kinds of things that were unique and really Camp Gertrude Bryant type things that she did for this reunion. So the decorations were killer, and the outdoor games that she managed to create for that day were really nice, as well as what crafts she decided to put at different tables so people could roam around and go to different stations and do a different project. They had God's eyes, and they had beading, and they had stamping on cards, and just a whole host of things that they did. And she had us set up displays of former crafts that girls had saved through the years in their treasure boxes. And we put up 3 trifold foam core boards with the continuation of when each one of the directors came, and then what happened and who some of the people were that worked under them. So the girls could go and pick out, gee, that's when I went to camp, or no, that's when I went to camp over there. And we had a lot of fun putting that together, from newspaper articles about the changes at the camp and what had happened. And I may have mentioned at some point that these girls were all from lone troops. They weren't from big Girl Scout troops that were under a council. And so they were pretty independent. They didn't have to talk to anybody about anything. They had kind of free rein to do what they were going to do. But they could talk to national to find out if something was all right or not all right to do with the girls. But they just did. Every director was creative in their own way. Some had worked under councils and some had not. Back to the reunion, we had, I was remembering the tables were set up so that the mess kits and other things connected to camping were the centerpieces. They were really quite cool. And they put a grace that was used all the time, the Girl Scout singing grace. And then they went to gather their lunches and brought them back to their tables after they got their milk, and they had their choice of milk. And then they would sit around with all the girls at their table, and they weren't assigned seats, so you got to sit with whomever you wished. And they had their lunches, and then some of them got up and went outside to do the games that were set up around the senior center. We had some interesting guests that came, and were thrilled that there was one member of the Burnham family that came with his family, and we were delighted to have him there. So that was Pete, and he was a great guy. And his son came, and his grandson came with him, so that was fun, and his wife came. So that was because the Burnhams were the ones that didn't donate, but they allowed the camp to be built on their property, and it was like a loan. And the second year, they did things, the Women's Club or whoever was organizing that part of it, they got together and they had a lease agreement with the Burnhams. And it was better to have more of a business sense about things. Previously, the Burnhams had actually donated the land for the community club and the pool and the West Avon Fire Department. So they'd done their share and then some.
Sure.
I mean, today that land would just be so valuable. You can't imagine for the family to give up that land. But one of the sons wrote to me years later and said, he didn't think anything about the land. He said, we just thought it was great that the pool was next door and that the community club dances were next door and the fire department was
That's
right
great.
around the corner. So, they just had a great sense of community. So
You opened the door for me. Actually, this is a question we hadn't talked about, but it ought to be rather easy for you. You think about like from the late 40s to the 2014 when the reunion happened.
right.
How many ladies or young men stuck around Avon? That was such a dynamic period of time. I would guess it would be a small number, but I would guess you would know all of them too.
Well, I didn't know the very oldest ones because they were out of high school before I was in high school. They were that much older. And some of them who came back were also counselors, and they were older. But we just had, I think it was around 70 people that showed up that day. And that's quite a lot.
Sure.
Many of them live locally, and a lot of them had stayed in touch with one another in small groups. I'm not saying they knew all the different ones that were there, but the chatter and the memories that flew around that room that day were just heartwarming. It was really fun. And at the end of besides all the crafts and the sports and everything, we also had a campfire sing at the end. And it was just, they had an egg and spoon relay race.
Okay,
That was
I remember
one thing
those,
they
yeah.
did, yeah. And Sue, our creative gal, had set up a campfire in the middle, and she even had, it looked like flames. It wasn't. It was, I think, probably a tissue paper that was orange and red and looked like flames, but she brought in rocks and put them all around because you always put rocks around to keep a fire from going amiss.
Sure.
And we had everybody sit by unit, whatever unit they were last in, or Anyway, that was fun. We had the husband of one gal came, and we had one boy who came because before the camp closed, they were accepting boys into the day camp because it was no longer strictly girls.
Were there songs or chants you remember singing?
The main one was Kaya Kayakas, Nobody Like Us. We are the girls from Camp Bryant. Always a winnin', always a grinnin', always a feelin' fine. Yeah. No. Hi. What was the end of it? Kaya Kayakas, nobody like us. We are the girls of Camp Bryant. Always a winnin', always a grinnin', always a feelin' fine. Kaya Kayakas. And the kids would shout this out at I know that we had a reunion.
Yes, I was going to ask
back
about that.
in 2014. And you should have heard them coming. These women, we had...
They all remember the tune just like you do.
And they were 3 generations. We're talking 3 different generations. They were up in their 80s. So, and younger ones. So it was just a really fun time. That was something that... There were actually some gals that were practically crying.
That's good. Well, you still sing with enthusiasm.
Oh, well, yeah. Not with any clarity, but enthusiasm, yes. I whistle now because I can't sing very well anymore. While they were singing, it's nobody like us, not nobody likes us.
I thought about that too after.
Yeah. And then the part that I found really fun is when the girls just sort of drifted into starting to sing in parts. They would do the harmony. And you could see people with their eyes closed and they're swaying to the music and thinking it was so cool. And it was beautiful.
And people still remembered their harmony parts.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think if you're an alto, you kind of know where to go with it.
Where you fall.
Yeah. There were no basses. And that was a real fun time. And they told some stories around the campfire. And that was, it was really like an old campfire. It was fun.
What lessons or skills from camp have stayed with you?
Leading singing. I ended up doing that with the church Sunday school. And not necessarily teaching parts for the music there, but getting the kids to sing, because a lot of kids don't sing. And we had a lot of fun things we would sing. I think one of the fun things was doing, do you want to go on a lion hunt? Did you ever do that?
Go on. No. I don't know. I don't know that I did.
They would have a leader, and it says, you start out, let's go on a lion hunt. So we start, and you have somebody wearing, who's the leader, and they're going to do this. And they start by, you're going on a lion hunt, and you're marching on the path, and you slap your legs. Then you go through a gate, and and then you go through the mud and you slosh. And then you march again over the bridge, and then you're making a bigger noise like that's going like that. And then you go from there through the tall grass. And then marching on the path a little bit more. And then you swim across the river, and you're swinging, and of course nobody's hearing anything, or you can go blub, blub, if you're swimming with your face in the water. And then you march on the path, and then your eyes go wide. And the leader says, look, a big fuzzy face, 2 brown eyes, long whiskers. Oh, let's run. And they all go back. You repeat this in the reverse. And
you go back through the sloshing.
and it's really fun. I actually brought some because this one gal, she did a wonderful job. And I don't know if I could just summarize a couple of the ones that she
Please do.
Told about. She said she was a brownie and living in Unionville, and she walked down to the center of Unionville and took the bus to West Avon, and when it arrived there, they were escorted to the small shed that housed a huge icebox. Yes, the old-fashioned kind with a huge block of ice inside. Our lunches were placed in the icebox with our names written on the brown bags to be retrieved at lunchtime. Then the next thing she talks about, she did this in order of her day, which I thought was super. She said, the camp began with an opening circle of campers and counselors hand in hand around the flagpole. The raising of the flag, a pledge of allegiance, and a greeting and instructions from the camp director outlining the activities for the day took place. The day always ended with the closing circle, lowering of the flag and the careful folding of that flag into the precise triangle. And they were very good about teaching that. I don't know as they do that today.
Treat the flag with respect.
Oh, yes. Eventually, we all learned how to fold the flag, and I remember it every time I go to a military funeral and see them remove the flag, fold it, and present it to the family. She says, Blue Skies was for the youngest campers, then Whispering Pines, Hearthstone, and High Oaks. As the camp grew, they added Hilltop, my personal favorite place. But Hilltop had a problem. The path to the campsite traveled over a very swampy area, and so began the first camper construction project, a corduroy road. campers were actually given saws and hatchets. We cut lengths of downed trees into lengths of approximately 3 feet long and laid them side by side to construct a walkway over the mushy parts. Then she says, each campsite had an Adirondack shelter, which is like a 3-sided log cabin with a floor. And actually, in my recollection, I thought that there was only one, and I'm not sure about that. But anyway, because most of them had tents. Now, she was a bit older than I, so maybe that's what they had, but they wouldn't have built them and then taken them down. So I'm not sure. She says campers made paths outlined with stones or small logs to make their campsite more attractive. They were becoming interior designers before interior designers.
Great.
Child labor prevailed, she said. Each morning you consulted the caper chart to see what task each camper was assigned for that day. It could be carrying water up from the pump at the foot of the hill to the campsite to provide drinking water for the day. That was a long haul when you were carrying water, I can tell you from experience. It could be cleaning up the campsite by picking up debris, papers, etc., to make everything spick and span. Or it could be the dreaded latrine duty. And she goes on to say, it involves scrubbing down the seats with a disinfectant solution and sweeping out the floors. This was followed by an inspection by the camp director to make sure that your campsite was perfect. She always carried a large clipboard with a list of possible infractions. I love that part. And I'm pretty sure I know who was there because she always seemed stern, but she really was warm-hearted down deep. She was a great director. She says, she goes on to say, after caper duties, campers usually changed into their bathing suits and walked down the long camp driveway, crossed West Avon Road, and arrived at the West Avon Community Club for our morning swimming lesson. Mrs. Betty Thompson was our instructor, usually assisted by 1 or 2 counselors as campers split into the various swimmer groups based on ability and which swimming test you had passed. She didn't mention how cold that water was. It was spring-fed, so you had goosebumps and purple legs and feet and hands.
No pool heaters in those days.
No, not even close. She says as you waited for your unit's turn to go to swimming, there were various camp activities. So she talked about all the crafts that she did and thought that was pretty cool. She especially seemed to like the gimp, the it's sort of plasticky, yeah, but you braid it, and she liked that. And after lunch, they did archery and worked on badges and campcraft activities. She says, if you were lucky, you had a talented counselor who played a ukulele or a guitar. And I only remember one who did that, and she was really great. Her name was Carol Caliendo, and I think she came from Boston and was friends with the director or something. But listening, having the instrument, the girls would start to sing when they might feel funny singing with just 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 girls in a unit. But it was really fun, and that gal would play up at the main unit when we would sing sometimes. She said buildings were added to the camp at various stages, so she must have gone there quite a number of summers. She said at first there was only the small cabin for the camp director and the shed that housed the large icebox. Later, the Great Hall was constructed. This building was large and was able to hold campers in the event of inclement weather. It also was a place to gather for speakers and so forth. And then they added a kitchen with running water, and that was a real big deal. That was after the Lions had put in the actual well. She said, this was what I remember her for. As I became a little bit older, the mid-age scouts were allowed an overnight camping session. And she told about bringing a ground cloth so they weren't in the Adirondack shelters at that point because they had floors in them. But they were sleeping on the ground, so you brought something to put underneath where you were going to sleep so you wouldn't have, it wouldn't become damp. Your sleeping bag or the blanket she brought wouldn't get damp in the night. And she talked about preparing the meals over an open fire and how hard that was, and it was hard to clean up. And when you were in charge, sometimes you almost didn't have time to eat at the end because you're so busy cleaning up and making sure the fire was doused and everything that the cleanup took all your time and you didn't get to eat much. So, and the day of her first sleepover, she took swimming lessons in the morning, and I was a late learner. Unionville did not have a swimming pool, and my swimming had been limited to swim in the ankle or waist-deep Moses Brook. I was gradually learning to swim a few strokes and had progressed to finning, where your hands go back and forth by your side and you just move along very slowly on your back. Uh-huh. And that's easy to do. And she said, I was proudly finning across the pool, required bathing cap on my head, and it seemed to me that I had been finning for a pretty long time and was about to bump my head on the other side of the pool, so I stood up. Well, she'd already made her way to the deep end, and when she put her feet down, and she was panicked out of her mind.
Yikes.
Yes. And she tried to swim with all her might, but she wasn't getting anywhere. And so she said, just lots of bubbles, blub, 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 blub. And she said, finally, an arm around my waist and a calm voice in my ear that I said I'd be all right. Just hold on. I would soon be holding on to the side. She says, God bless Betty Thompson. She pulled me out of the grips of the bottom of the swimming pool. She told about making the dinner that time with another gal, Janice Carville-Trumbull, who lives up in Canton now. And by the time they finished, everything was cold. The spaghetti and everything took too long, and the kids were too hungry waiting. The whole thing was a disaster as far as they were concerned. The kids didn't think so, but by the time they cleaned up, they didn't get much to eat. Mm-hmm. And she said, hot dogs on a stick provide a quick meal and not much cleanup. That's a little word of advice. One thing she really liked is that they had been taught how to lash things together. And when she was old enough to go to High Oaks, the older girls had a counselor who decided they needed some furniture. So they began to cut oak logs and learn to lash them together into benches, chairs, and tables. And she said, that's a skill I still know how to do today, and it made her very proud. We had a nature program for the campers, and the presenter had brought in a few woodland creatures. The presenter had no way of knowing that I was deathly afraid of snakes. I had had a very unfortunate happening with a snake at about 4 years old, and I couldn't even look at one without panicking. The presenter had a snake in her hands and was explaining to the campers how snakes were not wet and slimy, but were actually smooth and silky to the touch. She walked over to me with the snake in her hands, turned it over, and asked me to feel the bottom side of the snake body to verify how silky it was. There was no way that I could show fear in front of all those vulnerable campers, so something inside me made me actually touch that snake. It was soft and silky, but I don't think that anyone knew how much that little touch with my finger it took to cure me. I still hate snakes.
You grow up a lot at camp, I guess, with experiences
yes,
like that.
Yes, you do. Yeah. So I don't think I mentioned anything about the service and that they provided for. It says her service was held at the Avon Congregational Church, and they had a huge attendance. They told how many people were there in a magazine article, a newspaper article, and I can't recall exactly how many people it was. But
what year was that?
1944.
Okay.
She was. The day of the actual funeral was her 27th birthday.
Oh, horrible.
Yeah, and she had died 3 days before that, I think. But they had the largest attendance ever seen in the area. WACs, those WACs, from Camp Patrick Henry in Newport News, Virginia, and Bradley Field acted as honor guards. Members of the Avon and Simsbury American Legion were bearers. Soldiers from Bradley Field fired the customary volley, and a bugler sounded taps after the committal service at the West Avon Cemetery. So it was quite a thing. And the camp was named Camp Gertrude Bryant after the only Avon woman to give her life in service. It was not through a battle, but she was serving at the time. And both in recognition of this supreme sacrifice and of her unselfish devotion to the cause of Girl Scouting in Avon. Very special indeed. I just thought it was amazing that they decided to build they vowed they would build this camp in 1 year's time from the time they thought they were going to do it. And that included getting the property and getting people to donate things, time, finances, all those things. It's just mind-boggling to me to think that while people from the community were doing those kinds of things, the Women's Club under Alice Bryant, her mother, were just so busy doing things like figuring out how they're going to get the girls to register, getting advertising in the newspapers, finding out what they needed to do for health reasons, for safety and health in the camp, making sure that they had the proper insurance for everything that they needed. If they had girls coming in, they needed to all go to doctors to have their slips signed by the doctor to make sure that they're healthy enough to come to camp and so forth. So it was pretty endless. Then just who's going to take in the money? How many 2-week sessions are they going to have? Are they only going to do it for 2 of those or 4 of those or maybe 3 of those? And in the long run, they ended up with 4 2-week sessions. And then they had 1 week where they had an overnight for 4 nights. And the camp was run from Monday through Thursday. They didn't meet on Fridays. I don't know why. And the first year, they were charged $4 for a session.
Well, that's a good value.
Yeah, indeed it is. Indeed it is. And they had camperships where girls who could not afford that were given a campership and they paid the money for them. So it was very community oriented, that's for sure.
It's funny because they call that generation the greatest generation. And a lot of the framework that was made in these rural to suburban communities were made by people who are just can-do people getting it done in
Yes.
communities like Avon.
Yeah. Well, people looked for what was for the greater good. And basically that was it. And back then, everybody wasn't so insurance conscious. I shouldn't say that probably out loud, but,
It was a different time.
It was a different time, and if you got hurt trying to bring a tree down or something, you said, "Doggone, I guess I better go see the doctor." I guess I probably mentioned this before, maybe, that they had the flag lowering at the end of the day. Everybody gathered around the flagpole, and they would sing "Day is Done."
The taps type song,
yes,
right?
Yes, and then they would fold the flag, and that was what she mentioned in her thing about having to fold it perfectly. And they would practice that. That wasn't something you just, rolled up the flag and stuck it back in the closet and brought it out in the morning again. It was done properly, and a lot of girls really learned to do that kind of thing and to respect the flag. I think I probably mentioned that it was the community chest and United Way that also helped, and the Lions. Over years, they got more organizations and money from funds in some of the other communities because they were so grateful to have a place for the girls to go to camp that they began to pitch in as well as the people in Avon.
The community chest was an Avon, like civic fund, that type of thing?
Well, that happened to be in Farmington. And there were two things. There were two funds that they drew on from Farmington for one or two of the projects that they were doing. So there was a lot of goodwill. And the fact that they gave camperships, that was a big deal. I think that eventually somebody mentioned in one of their memories that they had to pay a little, a pittance to ride the bus from one of the other towns. Mm-hmm. I don't think they did in Avon, to my knowledge, but I could be wrong about that. So, the boys started coming in 1960. At first, it was first through third grade, and later they added fourth grade. And of course, they had to hire some boys to be their counselors in their units. And at that time, toilets were installed by the Lions with funds from the EB Foundation. That's another one, that Ensign Bickford, that I wanted to mention. And the high school was built in 1958. So during bad weather from then on, the campers were allowed to use the high school gym. And it says here...
That's the current high school, right? But
yes,
it did,
yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And the year 1958, 175 campers were enrolled in just the first 4 weeks, 2 sessions of camp. That was a huge... that place was like a beehive, and it was run so well. And Midge Smith was the last director, and she was there for 10 years. All the others, their tenure was a year or 2 years. I don't know if anybody stayed 3. And Midge's husband was active in the Lions, so they gave a lot of money, and she was there, and her kids were there, and, it was a family affair with all the things that they were doing. Camp Gertrude Bryant evolved from a Girl Scout camp to a community day camp during its 18 years of existence. Children who attended the camp learned skills and developed valuable disciplines and habits that stand them in good stead to this day. We are grateful to the Avon Women's Club, the Burnham family, the family of Gertrude Bryant, and the Girl Scouts, the Avon Lions Club, the EB Foundation, the Community Chest, and the United Way, camp directors and staff, and the host of community volunteers and benefactors who contributed to this thriving gem in the midst of Avon, Connecticut from 1947 to 65.
Avon Talks, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Jeannie Parker, today. It really has.
Thank you. I've enjoyed rereading all these things about the camp and all the people who made it happen.
No, that's a story that needed to be told. As we come to a close, we're reminded that places like Camp Gertrude Bryant are more than just land and buildings. They're living chapters of a community's history. A chance to honor a woman who dedicated her life to service and whose time was cut tragically short during World War II. The camp carried forward her spirit of leadership, courage, and community. The memories shared today are a testament to the friendships formed, the lessons learned, and the quiet ways the camp helped shape the lives of those who walked its grounds. Miss Bryant's legacy and the joy and growth she inspired live on in the stories, laughter, and values carried forward by the women who once called it their summer home.